Two worlds collide in Christine. John Carpenter and Stephen King, masters of suspense in their respective mediums. Let's go. Hey freaks and friends, welcome to the 9th entry of the John Carpenter review series. Today we're going to stick it to the shitters and take a look at the 1983 film Christine. So Christine stars Keith Gordon, John Stockwell, Alexandra Paul, William Prosky, and Harry Dean Stanton, with a screenplay by Bill Phillips and based off of the novel of the same name by Stephen King, released earlier that year. The story of Christine follows Arnie Cunningham, sort of a geeky student in high school who ends up acquiring a car that is pure evil. This is a story that should not work, but it actually does work pretty well on quite a few different levels. I think opening up with the assembly line was actually a pretty brilliant move, because it just allows us to really get the tone set for what's to come in this film. We see that, hey, this car's already a little bit of a shithead. It doesn't overshoot what it's trying to do and give us too much of an elaborate backstory. It's like, hey, basically this car's evil just because it's evil. From what I understand, I think the book has a little more of a heavy explanation as to why the car is evil. The dual transformation between Arnie and Christine is something also that I think is a pretty cool touch to the film. Basically, the parallel there is that the better Christine becomes when Arnie rebuilds her, the more cooler and more confident he becomes. The more evil that we're beginning to see the car become, the more sinister Arnie becomes. Like, he starts by wearing really bright colors, real geeky at the start. But as we see the car is taking on this violent sort of behavior, he's taking on this cynical attitude. His wardrobe becomes, black clothes, leather vests, eventually has a little red coat, kind of a James Dean looking coat, honestly. Really cool little, one of those cool little things to point out in the film that I think everyone's pretty aware of, but you just can't understate how cool that is. The love triangle, again, it's an interesting variety there, because usually when we get a love triangle, it's just three people. Here, I don't think triangle is even the right shape at this point, because it's you've got Arnie loves his car, but he's also got Leigh as a girlfriend. Christine is jealous of that. Dennis comes in for Leigh because he was initially interested in her, and Christine is like, hey, both of y'all need to die because you're a bad influence on Arnie. Just a weird little love triangle variety. It's just absolutely interesting, and it probably shouldn't work as well as it does in this film, but that's really probably the motto for this film and the story overall. Like, a killer car, just that whole idea is pretty ludicrous, but it works really well here. Another thing too that's really cool and effective in here is, this is a real bit of a very Carpenter thing here, is the understated violence in the film. We get more or less the implication of violence. Like, we see acts of violence, but we don't see the real money shot, as it were. We see, like, Christine approaching Buddy, and then we just see Buddy on fire kind of rolling out from under her. We don't see him get run over. When Moochie gets killed, we don't see everything completely. It very much goes back to the earlier Carpenter examples where we get just enough, we get the picture, and I think not seeing the actual attack, as it were, completely is very effective. It makes it feel, I think, a little more brutal than it would be if we just showed, hey, watch this guy get ripped in half. And I still do love seeing my fair share of gore, but we don't really get that in here. Climax to this film is a lot of fun. It is nice to see that they found a way to destroy Christine, and I believe it was John Carpenter was saying that there's something almost sexual to the whole thing, where Christine is getting mounted by the bulldozer and sort of being put in her place in some way. That I thought was kind of an interesting assessment. I really wish that I had actually noticed that on my own, but I gotta say that is really cool little, one of those cool little details there. Also pretty tragic with the death of Arnie. It is really cool when we do see him sort of making his full transformation. Like, he's full on like emo kid. He's very sickly looking. He's got the rings under his eyes. He's like really lost it by this point. It's pretty effective, and his death scene too was pretty brutal there. And I do like how when he goes out, he's not like, "Oh, Leigh, I'm sorry that I was this way." No, instead he's touching Christine like, "Hey, I'm sorry, babe. I gotta go." The final shots that we get in this film too, in the junkyard, it slightly echoes, I think, the ending of Halloween in quite a few ways. Not directly, but mostly in the sort of implication of, sure, evil may have been defeated, the power of good may have overcome for now, but it is only for now, because when we see Christine cubed up, we see a little bit of the metal hanging off, just kind of wavering. It's like, is it a little gust of wind making that happen, or is that her wanting to come back to life? In a few ways, that's almost pretty resemblant of the end of Halloween, when we see all the places Michael had been in the film and we hear the breathing. It's kind of like that in a few ways, but not entirely. But I think if you think about it, you'll see the similarity there. Our primary character in this film is Arnold Cunningham. He starts off as sort of the geek at school, and his arc throughout the film is that once he acquires the car Christine, he begins to change quite a bit. He becomes less geeky and becomes a little more cool, and the coolness ends up leading into becoming a dick, leads into becoming a potentially violent individual. And Arnie's a character you want to really root for. You want him to see the light at the end of the film. You want for him to be able to get that redemption and be, yeah, I see the error of my ways. Can I get the girl back? And speaking of which, it is cool to see the geek in the film get the girl, even if only for a short period. His best friend Dennis, he's a pretty good example of the best friend stereotype. I think John Stockwell plays the character pretty well. He's set up at the beginning to really show just what a geek Arnie is, so the comparison there is pretty cool in the portrayal. I'd say the only thing that I really have to complain about with this character is his really reacting in the New Year's Drive sequence. Chicken shit! That was just a little bit hokey, some of the facial reactions he made. But for the most part, he plays the best friend role pretty well, and is a pretty key piece to the human love triangle. So Leigh is a terrific leading lady, I think. She's the new girl in town, real pretty girl. She's one you really start to feel bad for as soon as Arnie starts to become a bit of a Cunningham on her. Like, you want their relationship to work out. You want for her to be able to pull him away from the car that is clearly taking quite a bit of brain rot on him. You just want to see for them to work out, and ultimately she ends up teaming up with Dennis to be like, hey, I know you see just as well as I do that Arnie is not the same, and it's all because of that damn car. So the bully characters, I think everyone knows to some degree that bullies are a set of characters that Stephen King is pretty good at creating. So to see them brought onto the screen here, I think they work pretty well. Buddy Repperton is the leader of the bully group here, and he's a real grade A prick. He's definitely one that I would not want to come across. But I mean, I think I'd probably be a bit of a dick too if my name was Buddy. He's definitely one that you think, yeah, this guy, you really get the feeling that he does want to hurt people and make people's lives a living hell. And he's got a pretty great death scene, so it's pretty cool when we see him get his comeuppance there. Moochie, he's probably maybe the most memorable of the bully characters. This dude's a real fucking dick face. When he grabs Dennis's package there, like, he just fucking squeezes it when he's got him in a headlock and makes him fall to the ground. Real dick face move. And I'm also wondering, is Moochie a lot lizard?
Yeah, you know what? I'm a little behind on my trucker terms. A lot lizard would be a,
You know, truck stop horse. I mean, no.
I mean, it just seemed a little strange there. And the other two bullies, you've got Trelawney and Vandenberg. They're a little underutilized here. Trelawney, he's the guy getting the little shock treatment at the beginning of Ghostbusters. He kind of looks like the junkie of the friend group here. And then Vandenberg, I think this guy should have been given a lot more screen time, but I do have a bit of a previous film bias here. He was great in Friday the 13th Part 2, so I feel like if his character just went out drinking, he probably could have survived in this film. We also have Harry Dean Stanton in this film, and I will say right out of the gates, he is the only Carpenter regular actor to appear in this film, so consider that box checked right here. I think he's pretty great here in the couple scenes that he has. He's not the most effective character to the overall story, but it is great to see him on screen as the detective. I think he plays the role pretty well, and he's got a great presence opposite Keith Gordon as Arnold Cunningham there. Just a couple interactions that they have, you get the feeling he's that proper homicide detective he knows a little more than he lets on. By the end of the film, I'm pretty confused as to whether or not he knows exactly the full extent of what happened, or if he's just like, yeah, we're just gonna sweep this under the rug, guys. He's pretty great in here. I've liked him in the two films that we've seen him in here. I will say, though, he will always be the dad from Red Dawn to me. Character Darnell is also another fun character. We don't get a whole lot of him, but he's definitely in the film more than Harry Dean Stanton. But this guy is just absolutely freaking bitter, but I love every second of when Darnell's on screen. A super volatile temper. Overall, pretty nice guy at the end of the day, as weird as that seems. Roberts Blossom is very entertaining in this film, as LeBay, the guy who sells Arnie the car. He's just a real riot when he's on screen. He's got a small role, but I can't help but be entertained by just about everything he says in this film, and he just seems like the strangest freaking person to be living in this whole town here. I do also want to give mad respect out to Terry Leonard, the stunt driver, mostly for that fire stunt in this film, and honestly all the different car stunts that we do get in the film. Just knowing that this guy had to drive with the blacked out windows, which was really effective for the way the story flowed. That way we wouldn't know for sure if it was Christine or Arnie going around causing these people to die in the film. I thought that it was pretty effective there, but honestly, his work in this is really, I think, understated, because when you consider the fact that this guy had to sit in a fucking burning car and just kind of drive that around, it's like, yeah, that's pretty impressive shit, especially considering this was 40 years ago when the safety regulations I don't think were as heavy duty as they are today. So yeah, I just want to give out mad props to him real fast. This film was actually shot pretty elegantly, I think. Overall, the cinematography was pretty solid by Donald Morgan. I was pretty skeptical going into this one, because knowing that this is the first one in a while where we haven't had Dean Cundey shooting the film, I was ready to be like, nope, this isn't gonna work. But honestly, the work by Donald Morgan was actually very, very solid. It was pretty to the point. You get some nice tracking shots in the film. A lot of the shots do feel like something we would get by Cundey, where they're wide shots, but it doesn't feel like it really has too much of a voice that stands out. But he did make some pretty cool decisions in this film. I think one of the coolest things that he contributed was in shooting the opening scene. Watching one of the documentaries on the Blu-ray, you'll see that he had the idea to put in some Fujifilm. I believe it was the Fujifilm that gave it the older sort of feel at the beginning. So that was a pretty brilliant touch by him there. Overall, solid cinematography. Well, the music in this one by Carpenter and Alan Howarth is another knockout score by the two. There's a cue in the love theme, Arnie's love theme, that It kind of reminds me of Here Comes the Bride just a little bit. When he first sees Christine, you can almost hear that, or at least I heard that in there. But it's one of those things I thought was kind of interesting. I don't know if it's just because I thought I heard that, now I'm trying to hear it every time. But it's one thing that I thought was pretty interesting there. The Show Me car rebuilding sequence.
Show me.
I like that opening little stinger. It kind of reminds me of something we'd get in Halloween 3, perhaps. But that's probably, I think, about one of the musical standouts. Honestly, the music throughout all this film, especially in the scenes where shit's going down, I think is really, really good stuff. Just very pulsating. I absolutely dig this score here. So overall, Christine is a pretty fun ride. The characters and most of the story beats are what makes this film work the way it does. They're probably the best parts and the strongest points of this film. And to that, we really have to go back and credit Stephen King himself, because this all does go back to him. On that note, this is, I think, one of the more interesting films that are based off of his works, but there are quite a few heavy hitters in that realm. Some are shit, but this one's pretty good. That is an element that is ultimately nearly impossible to separate from this, but looking at it solely as a film, trying to not look at it as an adaptation, this is a film that does work pretty well considering just how goofy the overall story and main idea of the story really is. Most everything here works pretty well for me, honestly, but I don't think I would put this really in the sphere of John Carpenter perfection, but it is an enjoyable enough time. It is a film that I do like to rewatch. It's one that I could watch and enjoy for what all goes on throughout, but it's also one that I can just put on and enjoy as just background noise, or just to kind of pass some time, don't have to pay attention to it. It's one that I enjoyed nonetheless. So at the end of the day, I give Christine 4 toasts against the shitters out of 5. As always, I want to thank you guys for watching. Please go down below and play with some of those icons, like and sub. Leave a comment down below. Did this film work for you, or did you think the plot was just a little too goofy with the overall idea of a killer car? And be sure to come back next time when we go into the next step in the John Carpenter series. We're going to be taking a look at 1984 Starman. One other thing I think is really cool in this film too is the fact that the odometer on Christine is seen going backwards, as in the numbers are getting lower. That should not happen, but it seems the more energy the car gets, the lower her numbers go.